Hi everybody, it's Franny, and today is day 7 with the Spyder. So today's project is going to be to get the exhaust system back on and then our final checks, and we're going to see if this car actually runs any better. In the last episode, we got our heads back on, got the valves back all sorted, and I set the valves. I also installed the carburetors. So for today, what I want to do is some final mechanical checks, and then we're going to install the exhaust system and give this thing a try. We'll see. I kind of have a sneaky suspicion it's not going to be perfect, but hopefully it'll be at least a little bit better, and we can certainly rule out the mechanics of the head, so that's awesome. So as far as the carburetors go, I did go ahead and reset the mixture screws back to 3.5 turns just as a starting point, so I'm probably going to end up having to go back and rebalance everything. That's totally fine. On the right carburetor, the accelerator pump diaphragm was weeping out the center, so got a new one of those and got that installed too. Really simple, it's just 4 screws, pull it out, put the diaphragm in, put the new one. It's really pretty simple. So got that done as well. And I think we'll kind of go from there. I did pull the distributor and take a look inside that distributor as well. And the mechanism, it was working. It seemed to be working okay, but I went ahead and kind of flushed it a little bit and re-greased it, just trying to eliminate as many possible things and box this issue in so we can get this engine running properly. So, all right, so we got a bit to do today, so let's go ahead and get started. Before I go through the fuss of refitting the entire exhaust system, I want to turn the engine over a bit and just make sure that we don't hear any bad clunks or clinks, or we got everything back together okay, because, you know, it would be really bad to find out once you hit the starter. That would be super bad. So what I'm going to do is just crank it over by hand, just kind of run it through, maybe a full revolution or so of the engine, or maybe a couple, just to be certain that everything sounds okay and we don't hear any weird noises. I'm just listening for anything bad. Sounds good to me. And certainly any mechanical interference. Now's when the time you want to find it. All right, that sounds pretty good. We would have heard something bad if we had by now. So, all right. All right, so next step is going to be to refit that exhaust. Should go pretty easily. Okay, that is the muffler back on, or the pipe, or whatever. I don't think it's much of a muffler at all. I think this thing is a straight pipe. Well, I think that's pretty much it. I think we've crossed all our T's and dotted our lowercase j's. So, looks pretty good. This thing's in there solid. We've done all of our stuff. I think it's time to actually give this thing a try. One final thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and turn on the ignition so the fuel pump fires up, and I want to just double check all of our fuel connections. There we go. There we go. We can hear it pumping away. Okay, this one's dry. Let's check the one on the other side. All right, this is our connection on this side. Yep, that one's dry too, so this looks good. Okay, well, the moment of truth is here. Have the fire extinguisher at the ready here. Have Heidi over on the other side. She's going to just monitor things for me. I've got a camera underneath in case we have any weird oil leaks or anything. But we're looking for just nothing bad to happen. So, okay, let's give this a try. All right. Moment of truth. So we do have some little bit of smoking here and there is what we expected, but I wanted to let the engine die. I look like I have a small fuel leak here on the left carburetor, so I'm going to address that right away. I think at this point we can rule out the valves and the head, so that's awesome. So I think it's just going to be a matter of tuning things. I want to get underneath and I want to check all of our push rod tubes and all the oil passages and everything down there. I just want to make sure that we don't have any massive leaks anywhere. We're just going to kind of go through at this point now that it's sort of running-ish. And then I'm going to pop the air cleaners off. We'll get to tuning the carburetors, and I want to double check the timing as well. Well, looks like we have a small leak on cylinder number 1 here on the intake valve. So we'll have to take a look at that. And on the other side, we have a little one on cylinder number 4. We have a small leak there as well. We'll have to address that. All right, looking on the engine side. On the left side, things look pretty good there, I'd say. Doesn't look like we have any leaks on the inside, which is great. All right, looking on the right side of the engine, that looks pretty good too. Looks like we don't have any leaks on the inside, so that's great. Let's see if we can get this guy to stop leaking. I have a little bit of a pipe wrench here that I can use to sort of clamp on and spin this thing. And I'm going to use the screwdriver and sort of pry this washer back a little bit, which will pull the tube back. And I just want to kind of spin the gasket. It just looks a little low right there where I think it's leaking. All right, we'll see if that's any better. We'll do the same thing on the other side. Well, I ran the engine back up again after our little readjustment here of the pushrod tube, and looks like it's all nice and dry. Let's check the other side. It looks pretty good too. I'm seeing a little wetness there around the actual ring. If it becomes a deal, I'll go ahead and double check it, but no drips. All right, we're just going down the list here. I think what I want to start with would be the fuel pressure. I'm wondering if this thing's just starving as it gets running and then just kind of poops out. So we can do it pretty easily because this car has an electric fuel pump. So all we have to do is set our meter up here, and it's set at 0. I disconnected all the lines to make sure that we don't have any pressure in the lines. So what I'm going to do is turn on the fuel pump and see where it takes us. I think it'll come up here eventually. There it goes. As it starts to build pressure, builds up to 1 psi. A little bit better, maybe, slightly. Well, that was sure strange. That fuel pressure seemed to be bouncing all over the place. It started out at 1 and then climbed all the way up to almost 5, then back, settled in on 3.5, and then sort of piddled around a little bit, and now it's holding at 3, I guess. So very strange. I want to give you a status of how the engine is running at this point, so let's go ahead and start it, and then we'll talk through all of it later. Now we still have a lot of our same problems we had before. It won't really hold an idle well and it won't accelerate, but it's a lot smoother and a lot more even left to right. Let me warm it up a little bit. Now the important thing to note here is how long it hangs on to the power and how long it takes to get back down to idle. So let me do this again. See how long that takes? warms up, it will idle-ish, like that, sort of. You can call that idling. Takes forever to go back down to idle. Once it's good and warm, it'll idle-ish about here. It's still a little cool, but it should be idling at this point. And it's just not. There it goes. See, it'll sort of idle. All right. So let me bring you up to speed a little bit on what I've done so far. There's a bunch of little things I've been doing that I'll go back and bring you up to speed on. So the first thing was, in order to get this car to idle or run practically at all, I had to run those mixture screws out 7.5, almost 8 turns. Now those mixture screws are wobbly at that point. They should really be somewhere around 3 turns. So it was one of the commenters, Tom Moss. Thank you so much, Tom, for your input. He said that, you know, be careful of these dellortos. They're not like your Zeniths on the 356. And I was like, okay, why? And that these screws act differently. So on the Zeniths, these would be air bypass screws, and they would make the car run leaner, not rich. On the dellortos, they're mixture bypass screws, so they actually dump fuel past the throttle body or the butterflies into the intake manifold. So that's a big difference. And if you notice when the thing is rolling up about 2,500 RPM and you let go of the throttle, it takes forever for it to come back down. That's because most of the enrichment is around the butterfly valve. That's not right. The other thing we're not hearing, very importantly, is backfiring. If this car was to backfire, it would go off like a cannon. When the 356 backfires every once in a while, it kind of does, you can hear it throughout the whole neighborhood. This thing has pretty much a megaphone on the back of it. It just should be nuts. And I've never heard this thing backfire. I've heard it pre-fire quite a bit through the carburetors. So that tells me that the engine is running very lean. Well, what about that then? Well, if it's running lean, we got a couple of possibilities. One, we may not be getting spark. So I went ahead and tested the coil. I wanted to make sure that the coil was putting out a nice solid blue spark. Next, I went through and double checked the timing. Now, if the timing is very, very retarded and pulled back and very, very late, it'll also sound like that as well. It just isn't burning. In other words, it's getting the fuel, and the fuel's fine, but it's not burning it properly. So that's the electrical system's issues. So I checked the timing, and the timing was fine. Now, the next thing to look at was thinking, well, okay, if the timing's good, coil's good, then what about the gas itself? So I talked to the owner and he said, yeah, I put in some gas on the way over, and I was it didn't smell bad, but I thought, you know what, I better take a look at that gas. And the gas in this car was sort of a bad yellowy color, orangey color. That's not right for gas. In fact, you know, I wouldn't show that to my doctor. I think they'd probably think I had some kidney issues or something. So gas should be clear. So we went ahead and drained all of fuel out of the tank and refilled another 5 gallons of pure, clean, right from the gas station gas, and it was clear. Okay, so that didn't seem to fix the problem. It is running a little smoother. We did verify from the fuel line here that we've got good fuel going in, and I've run enough through the carburetors to clean them out as well. So that's not it either. At this point, I'm still a little bit confused, but I have some ideas. So I went ahead and pulled the air cleaners off. I pulled the main jets out of this and took a look at them. So they're 1.2s or 120s on the mains here, and 0.5 or 50s on the idles. Well, that got me thinking a little bit. When I was working on the little Beetle, Miss Lemon Drop, in order to get the engine to run properly, I had to put 135s in that car because I think it had 120s as well, and it just would not run with those teeny weeny little jets. Part of it has to do with that 009 distributor, but I have a sneaky suspicion that this car is just not getting enough fuel. It just sounds like what it is. We've checked the fuel system, we've checked everything else, the ignition, everything else, and it still sounds like, and I have to run those bypass mixture screws out so far, which tells me it's just running terribly lean. All right, so I think my next step is going to be to pull the mains on all 4 mains on the 2 carburetors, and I'm going to start with a 135. I have a full set of jets, and if it runs, but I have to run the mixture screws all the way in because it's just too rich, then I'll start backing down the way with those, putting in smaller jets and see what we get. But I think I want to start with the 135s and see if we get any difference at all. I've pulled all 4 of the main jets out of the carburetors here. My 2 on the left and 2 on the right. And what I'm going to do, the jets on these are just this little bit right here at the end. And these are 120s, which I think are a bit lean for this. So I'm going to pull these out. I have a new set of 135s, and I'll go ahead and throw them in. Now, a thing to note about jets and something to remember is just because it says 135 on the package or 135 stamped on the jet doesn't necessarily mean that it's 135. These, I believe, are brand new, but people sometimes just drill them out to whatever size they want them to be and forget to file off and restamp, so you never really know what you're getting. Really should use, they make special tools that are just all the right sizes, and if you can kind of fit it in, then you know you've got the right jet size. But I'm going to make an assumption that these are truly 135s because they're brand new and in their original packaging. So I'm going to swap them out, all the 120s with 135s. We're going to give this a try and see if it makes any difference at all. With our new jets in place, let's give this a try. I also ran our mixture screws back to 3.5 is where they should be anyways. So the engine is still a little warm. It's still, I would consider it kind of cool, but it is a little bit warm. But we'll go ahead and start the engine and see where we are. That's a definite improvement. Let's warm it up a little bit. Now it's starting to actually run properly, I think. I saw a little fire come out of this carburetor. It's still actually a little lean, believe it or not. The engine's not quite hot yet. Well, it's certainly not a clean tune, that's for certain, but at least it's holding its mid-range now. It was never doing that before. The idle's obviously too high as well. Hang on just a sec. Woof. Okay, well, I think we're actually on the right track. So we've got a little bit more mid-range now. It's holding an idle. I've been rolling the idle down. I think another reason why it won't settle on its idle is because literally the stop screws were too high. So there's more than just the main jets in this thing. There's a set of idle jets as well. Those are 50.5, and I think I'm going to kick those up to 55 because we had to push the mains up to 135s in order to get any real reaction out of this thing. And with the fire that's still coming out of the carburetors, it might still be running even a little bit lean. So a lot of times I'd have to check the Dell manual, but in many carburetors, the idles run continuously. So they run all the time. And then the mains kick in when they need to. So if we richen up the idle, I think that's going to help. So let me go ahead and pull those guys out And we had some 55s. I don't want to go too big on them, but let's go ahead and try the 55 and see if that makes any difference at all.
Amazingly better, huh? So what I want to do at this point, I think I've got a rough tune on it. I want to go ahead and set the idle, and we've got to pull our throttle linkages off, set our idle, and balance everybody up.
I started by disconnecting both of the throttle linkages, and then I went ahead and balanced the carburetors left and right, took a few tries back and forth, and I was also readjusting the mixture screws as well. Once I was pretty happy with that, I went ahead and reconnected the throttle linkage, spun the engine up to about 3,000 RPM or so, and then balanced left to right again. And I found the throttle linkage on the left side to be a little bit hot, so I had to roll it down just a tad to get them to balance perfectly. But once I was done, I think it really did come together. So let me know what you think.
That's a little smoother. Come up on the power, great. The idle is still a tad high, I'd say. Not bad. Sounds pretty good.
Well, I'm going to call that a pretty solid success, actually. I think it's running pretty well. I want to do some final tuning, but we should probably just take it out on the road and actually drive it a bit, get it good and warm, and then just kind of double check everything. I've got the carburetors balanced. I think I've got my mixture set close enough to where we can get a good drive out of it. So I'm going to end the episode here, but I wanted to address a couple of questions from the last episode. So there were a lot of questions on the heads and what we did and why and all that. Okay, so the first one was the crack on the right head. Now, because that crack was between the two valves, the machine shop didn't seem very worried about it. They said if the crack was from one of the valves up to the spark plug hole, then that would be a bad thing. But they weren't really worried about it. They didn't feel that it was really going to affect the running of that head or its longevity at all. And I think it's actually pretty common when they bore those out for those big valves to have a slight crack in the center. It seems a little dicey to me, but that's what they said, and the owner was happy enough with it. We did also do the left side as well, so both heads went out. And it may look like at this point that we didn't need to, and our real problem was actually it wasn't jetted properly. But have to remember that the valves themselves, the keepers, were about to pull loose of the end of the valve. So the little notches at the end of the valve that hold the keeper on were wearing out, and they were almost gone. So the owner really wanted me to go ahead and swap out all four valves, that necessitating pulling both heads. And really, if you're going to do one, you should do both heads. You should really not just do one side of the car. You never can be certain that you'll ever get it even again. So that's why we did both. It seemed like a lot of extra work, but it really wasn't all that expensive. They just had to replace the valves, reseat them, clean them, and check the guides, and then double check the springs as well and make sure the keepers are on there good. So I think everything's fine with the heads. I'm feeling pretty good about it. Another cool thing is we solved all of our oil leaks. When this car came into the garage, boy, there was oil everywhere. So resetting all the push rod tubes and putting new gaskets on them really made a big difference as well. And so, as you can see, no oil smoke going everywhere, so that's great. So at this point, I still have several things to do. We've got to sort our fuel line, that's a big deal. And we have a few other things we want to get sorted on the car before we go all the way further. So I'll save those for the next episodes, and then hopefully we'll get to go for a drive. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Questions or comments, of course, just leave them down below and I'll get to them. Thanks again, and stay tuned for the next episodes in this series. And thanks so much for watching. Until next time, safe travels. Bye.